All right, hello. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'm Neelima. I'm from the University of Nottingham. I work with the Horizon Centre for Doctoral Training and the BBC in the UK. And I work mostly on use of personal data in TV content and in media. I'm a first-year PhD student. Today, I'm presenting my note, so it's a 10-minute talk, on challenges of using personal data to drive personalized electronic program guides. So right now we're seeing a shift from mass production of generic one-size-fits-all products and services to ones that are tailored and customized to fit every individual's particular needs and wants. We call this personalization. It's happening in all kinds of disciplines and industries, and the BBC is also following this path, and they're trying to personalize their videos, their content, their recommendations, and in the same way, they wanted to personalize EPGs as well. If you don't know what an EPG is, it's the list of programs that you get on your television when you're searching for new content or new channels. Well, basically, that list that you get that you scroll all the way to the bottom and then you don't find anything that you like, and then you switch off your television and go to something else that's more productive. So we started with, of course, literature review. We looked at user studies involving EPGs, and all we saw were user interface design recommendations and some recommender algorithms that people tried to kind of marry with EPGs. But we want to know the social and contextual implications that this kind of a technology would bring in users' everyday lives, especially considering the fact that so much personal data is being collected, stored, analyzed, and transferred on a daily basis from people's homes. I keep saying people's homes because of the reach that the BBC have in the UK. If everybody from the UK would know that. So what we did was we came up with a few scenarios involving our personalized EPG, and we presented it in a few towns in the UK. And let's start with the scenarios, actually. This is a current EPG. This is the BBC's iPlayer EPG that you get online. If you look at this right now, you can see that BBC 3 and BBC 4 are not airing anything. And if you don't have kids in the home, and if you're not into animation and cartoons, you don't need CBBC, CBBS. So there's a lot of inefficient use of screen real estate happening over here. So let's go to our first case. We went with a calendar diary kind of metaphor here. When you get your diary, it's empty, and then you pull in events to form your fully filled schedule. In the same way, we started with an empty EPG, where the user can pull in programs and TV content or even Netflix episodes and form a fully filled EPG. This was our case one. Case 2 was a recommender where the system delivers a fully filled EPG to the user. So it's not a bottom-up approach. Everything's automated and everything's delivered to the user. So when he or she switches on the TV for an EPG, they always get content that reflects their wants, their needs, their lifestyle, and their habits. Case 3 was when we considered the fact that people do not always consume media alone. They do it in different social settings, like with your parents, with your husband, with your boyfriend, with your colleagues. And the kind of content that they consume in these different social settings are different. So we came up with the idea of collaborative profiles. So here you can see a collaborative EPG profile of two university, let's say, roommates who party a lot, so they watch a lot of movies. There are party mixes on their EPG. They watch a lot of football, versus a father and two children who might watch nature shows, cartoons, and animation movies together. So you see the difference there. And on to case 4, which is where we introduced IoT into the whole scenario. We showed them the kind of granular data that could be recorded about people in the home using devices like the TV itself, phones, tablets, sensors in the house, etc. We showed them, again, the granularity and the kind of control they could exercise at the moment over this data that is being collected about them. What we did was we used these UI mock-ups as technology probes, and we ran focus groups across the UK, and we applied thematic analysis on the data that we got, and we came up with these results. Let's start with the leftmost ones. Appreciation of personalization. So all the users, well, 95% of the users wanted the personalized EPG because they felt that the current one did not cater to their needs and it wasn't made for them. Need for quick and simple interactions were emphasized a lot, which is also why our calendar idea was completely rejected by most of our participants. They said that it involved a lot of effort and time, and they could not imagine sitting down and planning out their media consumption. And they also asked for support for social viewing. So they like the idea of collaborative profiles, but they also want to share media experiences with remotely located friends or family. And right now, they can only do it through social media in a very public way. They want to share media experiences in a private way, like maybe using the EPG. If you're able to send a program to another television, maybe, and if your mother or father lives in another house and they switch on their TV and they can see that you've recommended this particular program for them, something on those lines. And to address the elephant in the room, mistrust associated with personal data exchange, of course. Privacy issues and fear. A lot of users came up with a few dystopian scenarios. One example was somebody asked me, so if I'm watching a lot of terrorist documentaries back to back on my laptop and I get angry and the camera is like suddenly watching me and it puts together my reaction with the kind of content I'm watching, am I on a list all of a sudden? So these kind of scenarios came up, and lack of trust in the context of the home. Media consumption is often associated with the home and family, and home often consists of a lot of different cohorts of users, all right? There are people who work, who live in the home, children, that is minors, there are elders, there are lodgers, there are guests. So how do you handle all of these people's data? How do you go about the permission? How do you go about the data flow? A lot of questions again there. And they asked and asked and asked again for understanding the data that's being collected, what it's being collected for, why it's being collected for, especially for a media service, and how they can control this data so that they feel in power, at least for once. And with all of these results, we came up with a few recommendations. The first one is, of course, to provide users with offline social interactions, as I said, to go beyond just Facebook shares or uploading things on YouTube, to be able to privately share media content. And as you can see, there's definitely a predominant lack of trust in the scenario. How can we build that up? One is to go beyond transparency, to move towards legibility. Data legibility is something that we came up in a framework called human data interaction, where we think it is essential to not just be transparent, but to make sure that the users understand the data that is being presented to them. So to make it more easy to understand, easy to engage with, and interesting, so that the user actually derives value from the data that is presented to them. And of course, legibility does not mean anything until and unless the user is given control. So to move away from the current yes or no binary consent kind of system to a more granular control approach. And all of this would, of course, help with the last problem, which is the current lack of accountability in the digital economy. Accountability is stressed so much, not just within research, but also in law. If we look at the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights in the US, or the General Data Protection Regulation, which will be enforced in May 2018 in the EU, accountability is very important. And I feel like as HCI researchers, we are in a kind of like a golden spot, because HCI has room for major interdisciplinary interventions involving legal folks, technologists, designers, psychologists, sociologists, all of whom we feel should come together to help develop sustainable data-driven technologies. And on that note, thank you very much for this opportunity.